Welcome to another episode of the Meg in Spotlight series this January, in which we focus on topics revolving around magnetoencephalography, research conducted in the MEG field, and discussion about utilization of MEG in treatment of patients diagnosed with neurological disorders. Today, we're excited to have Sven Breutigam, the senior researcher and MEG physicist of the Oxford Centre for Human Brain Activity, as our guest. Hello, Sven. Thank you for joining us today. We met back in the summer last year, and you've been involved in many extremely interesting studies that have required the use of MEG technology at the lab. So today we're hoping to find out a little bit more about these. So let's start with our first question. For which major research tasks do you use MEG technology and why?
Yeah, hello, Gabriele, and thanks for inviting me. The question is, well, the answer is many fields. So as we discussed some time ago, we are looking into a number of disorders and abnormalities, but also on cognitive fundamental functions. So examples are from the early days: autism research, schizophrenia, anorexia nervosa, depression, but also disorders which are sort of in between, perhaps psychiatry and neurology, like motor neuron diseases and others.
So back in the summer, you told us about the SARS-CoV-2 study that you were involved in, and that's a very relevant topic, obviously, currently. And when we spoke to you about this, we felt it was a fascinating involvement. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, I can. So as we now understand that obviously this disease, this virus-mediated disease, primarily affects the respiratory system, but we have now good reason to believe that it's going beyond that. So there is evidence, at least preliminary, that the virus causes impairments in cognitive function, can perhaps even lead to mental disorders like depressions or so. But at the moment, it is very unclear what are the mechanisms. So is it just a severe systemic illness which has all sorts of repercussions, or is the virus invading straight into the brain, or are there other mechanisms, so say an immune response, which causes these phenomena which affect patients quite severely, or can affect them quite severely, but may not be easily explained with just a respiratory disease. So here comes MEG in. What we really want to understand is how the virus, by mechanisms we may not understand yet, affects basically large-scale brain networks and the dynamic of the brain response. So the project we have at the moment is really part of a larger study known as the CMOR, or the multi-organ impact of SARS-CoV-2 on the body. And MEG is here an integral part where we try to understand how the dynamic brain responses changes after the exposure to the virus. So at the moment, we're typically looking at patients who have recovered and now taking part in the study.
That's really interesting. Thank you. So how does the data retrieved in general from MEG technology help you in your research?
Well, we have it's sort of an integrated approach. We most of our studies not only use MEG, but we also have typically fMRI, other imaging modalities. So we use the EEG2, or we have elaborated stimulation with TMS or something like that. So in a sense, the best answer is that the MEG is a critical but also an integral part of of understanding disorders, mapping out routes of perhaps diagnosis, and ultimately building towards treatment of disorders.
So has the Megan Triax Neo installation made a difference to your research work?
I think so far I can say yes, although the answer is incomplete, as you know, once we had basically installed the new system and everything up and running, the pandemic kicked in and we had to shut down. But so far we clearly have seen, both from a few scans before the pandemic and now about since September last year, a clear improvement. So the system has a superior stability. It really massively reduces the downtime. The overall maintenances become much nicer, much more streamlined. And also there are clear advantages in terms of signal to noise ratios and overall robustness of the recording. So I think, yes, it is, I can't give a definite answer yet, but clearly there's indication that we're moving massively forward, and it does affect the analysis time and also the amount of and the types of algorithms we can sort of use with confidence.
Okay, and have you seen improved research outcomes from using the MEG in your studies?
Well, this is sort of a difficult question, as we typically make a decision to use MEG in the first place, and it's part of a larger setup typically, meaning we don't have an entirely direct control of what would be the results if we don't, or what would be the outcome if we hadn't used MEG. But nevertheless, from the earlier work with the MEG we done, and that, as you may know, was mainly into the mechanisms underlying autism, we had fairly clear evidence that the extreme time resolution and the disappearance of the signals, even with older MEG systems, clearly gave us insight. So an example is what we reported already some years ago, the so-called fast processing pathways. So we have seen very clear evidence, which was not there in any of the other, although some people argued it could be there and may have seen preliminary results. It was really the MEG which showed a clear existence of what I say abnormalities in these fast processing pathways in autism. And I think that is one of the points where we can say, yes, it's the MEG which giving us the insight.
And in terms of data analysis tools, which ones are you using during your studies?
We're using many. It is so, as you know, we have a dedicated analysis group here at OBA, and they are developing what is known as the OBA software library, which is in itself based on Fieldtrip and SPM. I'm myself using those, but also own software and many other packages like Brainstorm and EG Lab and so on. So it is, in a sense, it's often, because of the complexity of the MEG data, it's often advised to use more than just one package, or employing more than one way of looking at the data.
So where do you think MEG technology could be additionally used in research in the future, which is always an interesting question for everyone?
Oh, yes. I think from perspective, there are a number of domains. And for instance, in the whole field of neuroeconomics, neuromarketing, and what I'm very interested in, so-called consumer neuroscience, that are very clear-cut areas these days. There are already a number of MEG studies out there. Another big one coming up, I think fairly soon, is what is known as organizational neuroscience. We had just a sort of a seminal paper out there a couple of years ago. So there are areas which I think I would call it the broader domain of economically relevant behaviors amongst many others. So for instance, people may argue you could have a domain of neuroteaching, for instance, where people try to understand how different teaching approaches affect the brain and how that can be optimized. But from my perspective, it is the big area of what I call consumer neuroscience.
So this is a really fascinating topic for MEG. Could you explain a little bit more about the consumer neuroscience and how they would use MEG?
Well, I can give you sort of a example from our own research done already some years ago, which is effectively known as research at the point of sale. So the idea is, as we understand, consumers can have many reasons to buy or not to buy, and be influenced by a number of factors. And so one critical thing for a number of reasons, economical, marketing-wise, and so on, is the point of sale. So that's the moment when you are actually in front of a product, a service, or whatever, and you are now going to buy or not to buy, making that decision. And so what we showed is, and I think this is a very nice example of the power of MEG, is that we showed that, at least to some extent, the decision to buy a certain product. So we studied grocery products like meat products, dairy products, fruit and vegetables, that the decision is in part obviously determined by what your preferences are, what you have bought in the past, and so on. But there is also a very clear component of what we call the dynamics of the brain state. So we could show that using MEG, and I can't imagine that another technology can easily show that in a similar way, is that by using these, analyzing these so-called dynamic brain states, we could show that depending on the state you're in at the moment, at the point of sale, you will be influenced, at least to some extent, in what you're going to buy, actually. So in other words, we used MEG to make a prediction before the subject has seen a product, what the likely outcome, what the likely choice will be. So I think this is a nice example of showing how MEG can help to understand and differentiate, perhaps tell apart processes which are clearly based in the individual's past. What are my preferences, what I have done in the past, what I do next, but also how I'm, at least to some extent, dependent on the intrinsic, the momentary state of my brain.
So Sven, thank you so much for making time for us today and for featuring in the MEG Spotlights. It was really extremely informative insight into the world of MEG utilization at OHBA, and interesting to get an update of how the lab supports all these incredible initiatives by providing such pertinent information about human brain activity.
And thanks, Gabriela, for inviting me. My pleasure.